Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicole Agbayani. I'm the director of the San Francisco Office of Financial Empowerment. It's my pleasure to welcome you today to our webinar on student debt relief for public servants. For those of you who haven't heard of the Office of Financial Empowerment, we are housed within the Treasurer and Tax Collector's Office. Our mission is to leverage the power of City Hall to enhance financial inclusion and economic mobility for all San Franciscans. The topic of student debt is important and timely for many of us, as we can tell from having almost 1,600 people register to join us today. Our office is very grateful for the partnership of the Student Borrower Protection Center and the Department of Human Resources to bring this program to you today. Before we jump into the program, I'd like to share a few housekeeping notes. First, this webinar is being recorded. A link to the recording will be sent to every registered attendee after this program is complete. We'll also post a copy to our webpage, and we'll make sure to share that link with you in the chat. Second, we're reserving time at the end of the program for Q&A. We ask that you hold your questions until about 20 to 25 minutes into the presentation, as we imagine that many of your high-level questions will be answered via the presentation. At the end of the program, please add your questions to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen so that we can make sure to see them all coming in one place. And for those of you who are tuning in from YouTube, please share your questions in the comments, and we have a member of our team monitoring those comments to bring the questions into our dialogue here on Zoom. Now it's my pleasure to introduce San Francisco's Treasurer, Jose Cisneros, with a welcome message for you all today.
I'm San Francisco Treasurer Jose Cisneros, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today to learn about the important topic of student debt relief, and in particular, student debt relief for public servants. Student debt is a huge burden for many, and we know that that burden of student debt weighs more heavily on those who can least afford it. Last week, the Biden administration took a historic step in the targeted cancellation of up to $20,000 in student debt for eligible borrowers. You will hear more about this today. Today's webinar will focus on the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Waiver Program, also known as PSLF. For those of us working in government, in education, or for nonprofits, PSLF can be transformative. We've already heard from San Francisco government employees who've benefited and seen their balances go all the way down to zero. But to benefit from PSLF, you must apply by October 31st. Our expert partners from the Student Borrower Protection Center will guide you through this process, which can seem a bit confusing at times, but the relief is worth it. So thanks for joining us today. I'm excited for all of you on the call who will be able to take advantage of this limited time program for student debt relief.
Thank you, Treasurer Cisneros. And now I'd like to introduce from the Department of Human Resources, Kate Howard. Kate has served the City and County of San Francisco since 2007 in the offices of Mayor Gavin Newsom and Mayor Ed Lee. She is currently the Managing Deputy Director at the Department of Human Resources. Please welcome Kate Howard.
Thank you, Nicole. Hi, everybody. My name is Kate Howard. As Nicole mentioned, I'm the Managing Deputy Director at the city's Department of Human Resources. I want to first start off by thanking Treasurer Cisneros and the Office of Financial Empowerment's Director, Nicole Agbayani, for hosting this important webinar. I also want to thank in advance the team from the Student Borrower Protection Center, who will be presenting to you and answering questions today. I think today's webinar is going to help clarify many of the important questions that we have about how the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program works, the temporary rules that are currently in place that can help student borrowers like us, and some of the upcoming changes that were recently announced by the Biden administration. The city is a qualifying employer under the Federal Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, and it means that as a result, under certain circumstances, you can qualify for having your student loans forgiven. This is a really fantastic benefit for those of us who have chosen to work in careers in as public servants. I think as we know, though, the path to loan forgiveness can be complicated. As Nicole mentioned, I started working for the city after I finished my master's degree in 2007. And so I was one of the first group of people who would have been eligible for this program in 2017. And I applied and I was denied because even though I had paid on time, I wasn't enrolled in the right part of the program. So I was only successful in participating in the program after the temporary rule changes were implemented. So I am a poster child for why taking advantage of the changes can be really transformative and helpful. So I urge you to take advantage of the information that's being offered today and all the programs that are available so you can receive the benefits that you're entitled to. Just want to say that we appreciate our partnership with the Treasurer and Tax Collector's Office. We are excited to work with you as city employees to make this program and process more accessible. If you have questions about how to complete your certifications, or if there's information you need about to complete the forms, please do reach out to your department's human resources representative. You can also feel free to reach out to me or to Alia Chispi, who's our senior policy analyst at THR. We'll put her contact information in the chat. And I just want to say thank you again for taking the time to be here today. And I hope that many of you are able to participate in the program. With that, I'm going to hand the program back to Nicole.
Thanks again, Kate, and really appreciate you sharing your personal history of PSLF as well. Now we're going to jump right into our program. It's my pleasure to introduce two experts from our partners at the Student Borrower Protection Center, Winston and Amy. Winston Berkman-Breen is the Policy Counsel and Deputy Advocacy Director at the Student Borrower Protection Center, where he leads the organization's state, legislative, and policy work. Prior to joining the SBPC, Winston was the student loan ombudsperson for the state of New York and was a legal services attorney representing low-income consumers in debt collection, student loan, and foreclosure cases. His colleague, Amy Sulata, is the Outreach and Advocacy Manager at the Student Borrower Protection Center, where she has engaged in a lot of the PSLF waiver education and outreach work. Prior to her work on student debt issues, she was in the labor movement conducting research on a large East Coast union representing property service workers. So Winston will be our main presenter for today, and Amy will be joining at the end to moderate our Q&A. A quick reminder, once again, we ask that you hold your questions until about 20 to 25 minutes into the presentation, so we can try to answer some of them with the presentation itself. And without further ado, I'll pass it over to Winston.
Great. Thank you so much, Nicole. And thank you, Nicole and Kate, and to the City and County of San Francisco for inviting us and for hosting this to the Treasurer. My name again is Winston Berkman-Breen from the Student Borrower Protection Center. In a moment, I'm going to share my screen and give about a 25 to 30 minute PowerPoint presentation, and then Amy and I will do some live Q&A to answer as many of your questions as possible. As Nicole said, it'd be helpful if you can hold on entering your questions in the Q&A box for about 20 or 30 minutes. That way, once we do get to the questions, we can address the ones that haven't been answered yet in the presentation. The final thing I'll say before I share my screen and go through the presentation is I want to give you a bit of a roadmap about what we're going to share with you today. So first, we're going to explain the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program in general, how it works, how to qualify for it, et cetera. And then we're going to introduce some of the changed rules, this waiver that you've heard a couple of us mention so far, so that you know today, how does the program work right now, and what is the deadline for that waiver. Spoiler alert, it's October 31st, Halloween. So what do you have to do between now and Halloween to make sure you benefit from the waiver? That's going to be the third part. We're going to walk you through some very specific concrete steps you can take over the next 7 weeks or so, including showing you some screen grabs to show you how to literally take those steps. So there is some intentional repetition here. We're going to talk about PSLF and then special rules for PSLF, what to do to take advantage of that, and then show you how to take those steps. But that repetition is intentional. So hopefully, even if this is the first time you're hearing about this, by the time we get to the steps you should be taking, you'll be familiar with the terminology that we're using and with all of the program criteria. So with that being said, I am going to share my screen and we can get going. Okay, so Public service loan forgiveness. Congress created PSLF in 2007 to help public service workers who were struggling with their student debt and to make sure that future students and graduates wouldn't be deterred from entering public service by their student loan balance. So put quite simply, PSLF is the promise that if a borrower works in public service and makes payments for 10 years, the remainder of their federal student loan debt will be forgiven. That's the idea, but as we'll see, it's a little bit more complicated. So how does PSLF actually work? More than simply working in public service for 10 years, there are 4 specific criteria. I'm going to quickly list each of them, and then we're going to go into detail about each of the 4. First, you need to have a direct loan. That's a specific type of federal loan. Second, you need to be in the correct repayment plan, which for most people is going to be the income-driven repayment plan. Third, you need to be in a public service field, working in a public service job. And finally, you need to make 120 qualifying payments. That's 10 years worth of payments. All right, now I'm going to talk in more detail about each of these 4 criteria. Again, this is still the general PSLF program rules. So only direct loans qualify for public service loan forgiveness. Direct loans have been the main and primary federal student loan since 2010, type of federal student loan since 2010. So if you took out a loan since then, it is likely already a direct loan. But if you have an older loan, something called a federal family education loan or FFEL or FEL loan or a Perkins loan, those do not immediately qualify. What you can do though, is you can convert those non-direct loans into a direct loan through a process called consolidation, which is essentially refinancing with the federal government. You take out a new federal direct loan to pay off your old federal non-direct loan. Now, during the normal program rules, when you do that, you restart the clock on your 10 years. Any prior work you did on your non-direct loans does not get attributed to your new direct loan. It's a brand new loan, and you need to work and make payments on that loan for 10 years. As we'll discuss soon, that is different during the waiver. That's what makes this special waiver so powerful and so important. But I'm flagging this because the waiver will end at some point. And this is a normal program rule that once you consolidate and convert your non-direct loan to a direct loan, you're restarting the clock on PSLF, and you have to have a direct loan in order to qualify for PSLF. Okay, second, your direct loan needs to be in the right repayment plan, which is generally going to be what's called an income-driven repayment plan or an IDR plan. It does not matter how much you're paying each month, it's just that you're in the right plan. So these plans, IDR is an umbrella term for a couple of different repayment plans. And these plans go by a couple names. There's 4 main ones: income-based repayment or IBR, income contingent repayment, ICR, pay as you earn, PAYE, or repay, REPAYE. Some other plans, other repayment plans can qualify in certain instances, but these are the 4 plans that will categorically qualify. They have slight variations between them, these 4 plans, but they all have some common attributes. So essentially with the IDR plans, or I should say normally your monthly payment on your student loan is set by determining how much you have to pay each month to pay off your loan after a certain period of time. So if it's a 10-year standard repayment plan, how much you have to pay monthly for 10 years to pay off the total loan balance. The way the income-driven plans, the IDR plans work is they say, how much do you make? What is your income? And we'll take a certain percentage, 10 or 15% of that income, and that will be your monthly payment. It's a little bit more complicated than that. They calculate income in a special way. But again, it's meant to be an affordable payment option by capping how much you pay at 15% of your adjusted gross income. I do want to acknowledge that for some folks, it's still not very affordable. So that can be very frustrating, and that's a real problem, but these are intended to be the affordable options. Another thing I want to say about IDR plans that is not specific to PSLF, but is important for folks to understand, is that because you are often paying a low or sometimes even $0 monthly plan, if your income is sufficiently low, your monthly payment will be $0. Your monthly payment might not cover your monthly interest on your loan because the interest accrues monthly. Because of that, you might see your account balance go up. Some of you today may be experiencing this currently. It's like, how do I owe more now than what I borrowed, right? That phenomenon. That's because you're only being required to pay a low dollar amount. So your account balance will grow and grow and grow. Your interest will grow, and it might fold into your principal and start basically collecting interest on interest. Because of that, that means that someone paying these low dollar plans might be stuck in it forever, right? They're just never chipping away at it. Because of that, the federal government, after 20 or 25 years, will cancel your loan if you've been in this plan for that long. Again, that's also a long time. I don't want to make it sound like it's not. For PSLF purposes, that doesn't really matter because you're going to get cancellation after 10 years. I just want to acknowledge that these plans can make it appear and cause your balance to grow. And after 20, 25 years, that'll get canceled. But again, for PSLF purposes, when you're using it as the required payment plan, you're going to get your loan canceled after 10 years. Okay, so that's the right loan, direct loan payment plan for most people will be the IDR, income-driven repayment plan. Third, to get public service loan forgiveness, you need to work in public service. So importantly, the focus is on who you work for, not what you do for them. It's on your employer, not your role. Qualifying employers, you heard Kate say, the city of San Francisco is a qualifying employer. That's exactly right. And that's because all government organizations, city, county, state, federal, public school district, all public employers, government employers qualify, as well as all 501c3 and nonprofit employers, and certain other nonprofit employers that aren't 501c3, but that offer certain public services that Congress put into the statute. So again, all kinds of government, all 501c3, and certain other nonprofits. In addition, but it doesn't matter what you do for them, just that you work for them. And in this instance, work means being like a W-2 employee, means being employed by them. Volunteer work does not count. You also have to work at least an average of 30 hours a week or greater if your employer says that full-time for their purposes is greater than 30 hours a week. That's the current rules. They may change in the future, but today and for the waiver, that's what the rules are. So at least 30 hours a week or greater if your employer says greater. If you work part-time, but for two employers and they both qualify, you can combine those hours. So 15 hours a week for one nonprofit 501c3 and 15 hours a week for another 501c3 gets you to 30, and that is sufficient. Okay, so that's the third requirement. And the fourth is you need to make 120 qualifying payments. So as a payment on the right loan type, on the right payment plan, while you have the right kind of job, right? All of those have to line up. Your payments have to be made in full and on time, although the waiver will change that, which we'll discuss. But they don't have to be consecutive. So if you are working in public service and then you leave and go to the private sector or take some time off of work and then come back, you pick right back up where you started and you don't have to restart your clock. You also don't have to do this all with the same employer, right? You can move around between qualifying employers. So it's 10 years worth of payments, but it doesn't have to be made in 10 years specifically or all at the same place. It's not consecutive. Okay, so that's the regular program rules. There are, separate from the waiver, some changes to this sort of based on COVID that I want to highlight. One is that, as you're likely aware at this point, most federal student loan borrowers have not had to make a payment on their federal student loan since March of 2020. That payment pause has been extended through this calendar year, so payments will resume in January 2023. That was announced 2 weeks ago. Each of these paused months count as a qualifying payment, like an IDR payment. You still have to have the right loan type, you still have to have a qualifying job, but you don't have to actually make the payment. The pause, the fact that you're not required to make a payment is being treated like a payment. So that's about 2.5 years of qualifying payments for anyone who still has the right job and the right loan type. And again, through the waiver, we'll talk about the loan type issue in a moment. So I just wanted to flag that, but also to flag that some people have lost their job, right? Or they've had reduced hours because of COVID, which may affect them and mean that the payment pause months don't actually count. But for folks who maintained employment of public service employer, each paused month will count towards your 120. Okay, so this all sounds okay on paper, right? But as we heard from Kate in the beginning, and as you may have experienced yourself, PSLF wasn't working. So the program began in 2007. It takes 10 years to qualify. So 2017, as was Kate's experience, the first class of folks could have qualified for cancellation. When folks applied, there was a literal 99% rejection rate. About 800 applications were approved out of some 90,000. These applications were rejected for a number of reasons. Folks had the wrong loan type. They weren't direct loans. They were not making payments in the right payment plan. They didn't have the right kind of job, whatever it was. They had been misinformed about their requirements. No one had communicated properly in 2007 what they had to do or after 2007. It was a huge problem, as you can imagine. Congress tried to pass something or did pass something called TE PSLF, temporary expanded PSLF, to try to address part of that issue. It didn't address the whole problem, and it too had a very, very high rejection rate. So it really wasn't working. Clearly there was a problem. The promise was not being upheld. Folks had made educational and professional decisions relying on PSLF and were being let down. So last summer, the Biden administration, for the first time ever in the Department of Education, did something called a request for information. They asked borrowers, how is PSLF working for you? We want to know. And some 50,000 plus borrowers in public service from all walks of life shared comments with the federal government and basically explained that it's not working so well, right? And how meaningful it would be as a public service worker to have their federal student loan debts canceled. We heard from a lot of folks who saw their balances going up and up and up, right? That phenomenon that I discussed, and who felt like they were drowning in their debt and this program was not working for them. It was a huge response for this kind of thing, which again, the government doesn't normally do. So shortly thereafter, just weeks after it closed, in October of 2021, the federal government announced this special waiver that you've heard us talk about a few times, which is meant to address the issues that were raised by the borrowers who made those comments and borrowers who'd been rejected from the program previously. So for a limited period of time, from last October through this October, the Department of Education will retroactively grant credit towards PSLF loan forgiveness for borrowers for months that previously didn't count for the program, either because they had the wrong loan type or they weren't making payments on the right payment plan. So we're going to walk through each of those changes now. And again, you're going to hear some repetition from me because I want to really hammer this home. Essentially, what the department's waiver does is give public service workers credit towards loan forgiveness, regardless of federal loan type, for any period of time that they've had qualified employment since October 1st of 2007, when PSLF began. As long as they had the right kind of job, right? But also as long as their loan wasn't in default, deferment, or forbearance. So regardless of the loan type, loan repayment plan you were in and loan type, you'll get credit. It doesn't even matter if you actually made a payment on your loan for a given month, so much as that month your loan was registered for a certain type of repayment plan. So these credits will be retroactive, and you can get credits for past payments that were either ineligible, they were officially deemed ineligible, or you didn't even bother to apply. You can get that credit. So again, repetition here. In short, for any month since October 2007 that a borrower has had any type of federal loan and worked for a qualifying public service worker or employer, and their loan was not in default, deferment, or forbearance, that borrower can receive credit towards the 120 months required for PSLF forgiveness. There was a separate, more recent announcement about how to get credit for months you spent in forbearance and deferment, and we can talk more about that later, but that's technically separate from the waiver and doesn't have the same sort of deadline. So I'm going to put that to the side for a second. And again, just focus you on anytime you've had a qualifying job for any type of federal student loan since October 2007, as long as the loan wasn't in default, deferment, or forbearance. Okay. But this isn't automatic. So normally PSLF requires, you have a direct loan, as we discussed. The waiver will give credit for time spent on a loan that wasn't a direct loan, but you have to have a direct loan by the end of the waiver period, or you have to have applied to convert your loan to a direct loan by the end of the waiver period, that process called consolidation that I mentioned. And again, normally when you consolidate a non-direct loan to a direct loan, you reset the counter, you reset the clock, you don't get your past credit. That's what's special about this waiver, is you will get that. So you have to initiate the process to start that conversion. You have to file the application during the waiver so that your new loan that you take out, the direct loan, will get credit for your past time spent. The second thing that you have to do is that all borrowers should do, regardless of what loan type you have, is you have to make sure the federal government knows where you worked and when, right? Although maybe the IRS knows who your employer is, the Department of Education doesn't know. They currently don't speak to each other about that. That's protected information. They're setting up future programs to communicate that between each other. But currently, the Department of Education is only going to know where you worked if you tell them. So you have to certify your public service employment for any period since October 2007 that you want credit towards PSLF. If you don't tell them, they won't know. So in addition to having the right loan type through the waiver, you need to certify that employment during the waiver in order to get credits. And the deadline is October 31st of 2022, sorry. So about 7 weeks from now, Halloween. That means that you have to convert your loan type if you have to, and you have to certify your employment with the Department of Education before October 31st. It does not mean that you will get those credits or get that benefit or get cancellation by that deadline. It just means that you have to fill out your paperwork. It also doesn't mean you have to have your new consolidated, new direct loan issued to you by that deadline. It just means that you have to file for one. You've got to file the application. There's currently a huge backlog because people are taking advantage of this program. So the paperwork will get processed later. You just have to file it by that deadline. If the credit, so after October 31st, you'll get your credits or you'll get your loan canceled. If you have 120 credits, it could take a couple of months, honestly. But as long as you get your paperwork in by Halloween, you'll be fine. And these are permanent credits. So it's not the case that if you during the waiver don't, you get 50 credits, but you don't get the 120, you lose them. Whatever you get through this process, 120 or fewer, you keep on your account. And then after Halloween, the original program rules take effect again, and you can keep accruing credits through those rules. That's why we started out on this webinar by talking about them. And in theory, if you have done everything right during the waiver, you'll qualify under the regular program rules because you'll have given yourself a direct loan. You'll have the right loan type. You now know you have to have an income-driven repayment plan, so you can prepare to start repayment in January using that plan, and you'll be good to go. So again, you got to take these important steps by Halloween, but it may take a little bit longer for you to see the benefit. And that's it's not okay. It's frustrating, but it's okay in the sense that you'll get the credits as long as you meet that deadline. All right, so what do you actually need to know? So there's 3 things that we're advising folks, and now we're pivoting into like, what do you have to do? You're all here to learn about how to take specific steps. So we're going to tell you the 3 steps and then show you how to take each of them, and then we'll do Q&A. So to figure out if this waiver applies to you, the 3 things we think we're advising you to do is confirm whether your past or present employers are public service qualifying employers. You heard that San Francisco is, all government is, but you got to confirm that. Second, determine what your loan type is and consolidate it or convert it if necessary. And third, certify your employment and do all of these before the deadline. Okay, so first, confirm you have a qualifying employer. So nothing about this requirement has changed ever at any point. You always have to have had a public service employer, government, 501c3, other nonprofits. The one thing that has changed, I should say, is that normally under the PSLF program rules, you have to still be in a qualifying job when you apply for and receive cancellation. That means that if you already have 10 years under your belt, but you've retired, you can't get cancellation. If you have 10 years under your belt, but you move to the private sector, the for-profit sector, I should say, you can't get cancellation. So the waiver waives that, right? So if you have retired or you have gone to a for-profit firm, you can still apply during the waiver as long as you do it by October. And once you're eventually processed, you'll get that cancellation, even if you're no longer in a qualifying job. That's super important for someone who, again, has been laid off or retired or moved on to a different sector, right? To be able to get this for past work. It's also important, even if you don't have the full 120, you should just do this to get that credit, keep it in your account. And that way, if you do change jobs again and have a qualifying job again, you can keep building on it and eventually get that cancellation. So again, all government, 501c3, nonprofit, and certain other nonprofits. Okay. Now, how do you determine this, right? So the Department of Education maintains a list of employers who have already been deemed eligible, right? So they use something called the PSLF help tool. If you go to studentaid.gov, and I'll show you how to do this, you can search the PSLF help tool. You can enter your employer's tax EIN number, and they will pull up and say, yes, we can confirm this is an eligible employer, or we're not sure, or no, they're not, right? This is just a spot check. It is not an exhaustive list. It's only for people who've already applied. So if you're the first person from your organization, not going to be a problem for the city of San Francisco, but if you work for a small nonprofit or a small municipality that has never had an employee apply, it might come up as we're not sure, right? That doesn't mean you are ineligible. It just means they have no record of someone having already applied from your employer. So it's not exhaustive, but it's worth checking because if you work for a for-profit firm, this whole process isn't worth it because you're not going to be eligible for at least that employment period. If you have multiple employers, you should check all of them. Okay, so this is as we'll see in a second, it's the first step of this help tool, so it's very easy to access, and that's the first step you should take in determining whether this waiver applies to you. So second step, what kind of federal loans do you have? So the 3 major loan types that we've mentioned are direct loans, FFEL loans, and Perkins loans. It's those FFEL and Perkins loans borrowers who are going to have to consolidate their loans into a direct loan to be eligible. And they have to do that by Halloween, right? Even if the direct loan doesn't hit their account until after Halloween, they have to have filed the application to get one. And we'll talk about how to do that. Remember, what's so special about the waiver is that when you do that, you're not resetting the clock. If you wait until November 1st to do it, your new loan is going to have 0 credit on it because the waiver will have ended at that point. That's step 2. And then step 3, you have to certify your employment. Tell the Department of Education where you've worked and show them that you have qualifying employment. So all government, all 501c3, and certain other nonprofits. The form to do this is called the PSLF form. It used to be called the Employment Certification Form, or ECF form. If you've done PSLF in the past, you might be familiar with this. That same PSLF help tool at studentaid.gov can help you generate the form. We'll talk in a couple slides about alternatives to using the help tool, but if you can, that's the best option to do that. Once the form is generated, you have to fill it out and sign it, have your employer sign it, and then submit it to the student loan servicer, a company that's indicated on the form itself, which again, we'll talk about. Okay, so now we're going to go back through each of those 3 steps, again, repetition, and show you how to take them. So again, confirm your employer, confirm your loan type, and consolidate if necessary, and then file your paperwork. So we're going to start with confirming your employer. Okay, so you're going to go to studentaid.gov. If you don't already have a login, you should create one because you're going to be going here a lot for managing all of your student loans. But once you do log in, or just from the main page, you can go to Manage Loans in the red box here, and then Public Service Loan Forgiveness. When you click that, it'll bring you to the PSLF homepage for the government, and the first option will be to launch the PSLF help tool, which you should do. It looks like this on the left. You can hit the first step in it is the employer search. You can hit Select My Employers, put in their EIN number, and put in the time frame that you worked there, or if this is your current employer. They just made a new version of this help tool that is specifically about the employer search that you don't have to log in for. But if you are planning to do PSLF, I encourage you to log in and to do the search that way, because it will create a record with the federal government that you're someone who's interested in PSLF, and that might be beneficial down the line. So we encourage you to do that. If you don't know your employer's EIN number, you can look on your W-2, you can ask your HR staff, or sometimes you can Google or look at, if you're a nonprofit, look at Charity Navigator or some of these websites to get the EIN number. Okay, I used to work for the state of New York, so I punched in that information. You see state of New York pulled up, and it says in that red box, the green button, eligible. Again, this is a non-exhaustive list. It just means that someone else from the state of New York had already applied, and they'd already determined that yes, as a government employer, it is eligible. Again, for most San Francisco employees, it'll be the same. It'll look like this, but it'll say, you know, City or County of San Francisco. If something comes up that says ineligible or we're not sure, this is just a spot check, right? You should continue on if you think you work for a government or a 501c3 nonprofit, or some of the nonprofits that offer public services like public education or the other enumerated public services in the law. If you work for a for-profit company or union or labor organization or political organization, those are not going to count. But otherwise, if you get what looks like inaccurate information, just proceed, file your application. There is no downside to filing and getting a rejection. If the rejection is improper, you can appeal it, but you can't appeal something you never did, right? And if you file it and you do get the approval, that's huge. That can cancel your debt. So definitely check your employer, but if you're getting a negative or a bad result, don't let that stop you. Okay, so that's the first step of the help tool, confirm your employer. Second, identify your student loans. So once you've determined that your employer is eligible, is likely eligible, it's worth taking this step. What kind of loans you have can actually be very confusing, not just which of your loans are federal, which are private, but what type of federal loan do you have? It's incredibly confusing. So I'm totally with you if this has been a frustration of yours. So the way to figure this out is go to studentaid.gov, as I mentioned, and log in. That will have all of your federal loans. Any federal loan you've ever taken out will appear there. Some, as you can see in front of you, with a $0 balance. It has your whole history. If you are aware of other loans you have that you don't see here, they're going to be a private loan, right? So this is worth checking out. So once you land on your landing page, you'll see a dashboard like this. And this is a very back of the envelope way to do this, but it's effective and it works. Do you have a direct loan? Does the word direct appear in the name, right? So if you can see here under loan type, which has been broken out, there are these 2 loans that have a balance. One says direct consolidation unsubsidized, one says direct consolidation subsidized. Those are direct loans. They say the word direct. That subsidized, unsubsidized does not matter for PSLF purposes. It matters, is it a direct loan? Is it not a direct loan? If you look further down, you see one Perkins loan. Perkins, that's one of the types we mentioned. It is not a direct loan. If it had a balance, which it doesn't in this example, you'd know that you want to consolidate that. So here we can see that this person has a balance, but all of the loans with a balance are direct loans. They do not need to consolidate. But if you saw a FEL, FFDL, or a Perkins loan with a balance, you're going to want to consolidate that. You can get some more granular data from your dashboard by clicking View Details and then Download My aid data, which are both in red boxes here. That will have a text file it downloads for you, which has line-by-line information about all of your loans, including when you took them out, when you were in a certain payment plan, when you were in a deferment, all these things. For both of these exercises, you really only have to focus on loans that have an account balance because that's what you're trying to get canceled, right? So those are two ways to figure out what type of loans you have and whether you need to consolidate. If you do need to consolidate, here's how we can do them. And you're going to want to consolidate any non-direct loan. We're going back to studentaid.gov. We're going to manage loans again. And then on the bottom left here, you see consolidate my loans. You click that, you can launch the loan application right online. It takes about 20, 25 minutes. It's very easy to do. And again, you have to do this part by Halloween. They might process it after the deadline, but that's fine. You just need to have done your part. So the application, when you launch it, will guide you through all the steps you need to take, which includes selecting which loans you want to include in the consolidation. You want to include any non-direct loan. It'll confirm the amount and the rate of the new loan, and it'll help you select your new repayment plan and your servicer, and then it'll have you sign a loan. So the new loans will be roughly equal to the dollar amount of your combined loans that you're consolidating. You can consolidate one non-direct loan into a direct loan, or more typically, you can consolidate, because the word suggests, consolidate, bringing together. You can take multiple non-direct loans and put them together. Your new loan will be the same dollar amount, and it'll be a weighted average of your prior loans. By that, I mean, if you have a loan that has a lower interest rate but a higher balance, and you have a loan that has a high interest rate but a low balance, your new loan will have a mostly low interest rate because most of the dollars associated to it came from that lower interest rate loan. So it'll be blended, but it'll be weighted in favor of a lower interest rate. I also want to say that there are companies, servicers that process all these applications. And for a long time, Fed Loan Servicing, which you see highlighted here in blue, was the dedicated PSLF servicer. This summer, they transitioned to a company called Mohila, which you see right under the blue option. That is the company that once you start doing PSLF, your loans will be transferred to. So when you're consolidating, you might as well select Mohila as the servicer for your consolidated loans because it's going to end up there anyway. You can save yourself a step. So a quick tip we have about consolidation too. You've spent the last 20 minutes listening to me talk about consolidating non-direct loans, but there actually are some instances where you might want to consolidate your loans even if they're a direct loan that already qualifies. And that's mostly if you have direct loans from different points in your life, say undergrad versus graduate school, and if the older loans have more public service work attributed to them. You worked after college for a public service employer, and then you went to grad school, and now you're back in public service. Under the normal program rules, those loans would hit 10 years faster than your graduate school loans, right? Because they've been around longer and you had worked on them before grad school, as an example. The way that the federal government is handling consolidation during this waiver is when you put your loans together into the new consolidation loan, they're going to give it as many years of credit towards that 10 years, the 120 payments, as the most eligible loan that you're converting. So in this example, they will give the combined graduate and undergrad consolidated loan as many years or credit towards PSLF as the undergrad had if it has more than the graduate's debt, right? So essentially, if you consolidate direct loans that you have from different periods of your life together, you will cancel all of your debt on the fastest possible timeline instead of having your one direct loan get canceled and then a couple of years later, your other direct loan get canceled, right? So that's a way to maximize your benefit under this waiver, and is an instance why you might consolidate your loans even if you have only direct loans, or why you might want to consolidate a direct loan with a non-direct loan. If you have a mix of the two, you don't just need to consolidate your non-direct loans. You can include the direct loan if it's newer or younger and you want to get the credit spread evenly across your loans. Okay, so remember, for regular PSLF, you're going to need to after the waiver, be enrolled in the IDR plan. So when you're consolidating, you get to pick your repayment plan. It's a good idea to select IDR so that once you're done and payments resume in January, you're good to go. Again, those are going to be the income-based, income contingent, pay and repay repayment plans. Okay, so the final step, certifying employment, which we think everyone should do. Some repetitive, you're going to go back into the PSLF help tool, manage loans, public service loan forgiveness, launch that tool, put in your employer's information. New York qualifies, San Francisco qualifies, many other places qualify, and then proceed through the next steps. It'll guide you through, and then it'll end up with generating this PSLF form, which you are going to have to sign and then give to your employer to sign as well. It's a very simple form. It's 2 pages. You do the first one, the employer does the second one. Once you have it signed, you'll submit it to Mohila, that company. There are instructions on the back of the form for how to do that. Mohila is, again, the dedicated servicer. So you have to do this for every employer for whom you want credit by Halloween, right? If you have multiple employers since 2007, multiple forms. If you have one employer, but you worked for them and then left and then came back, you should do 2 forms because the form only has one space for when did you start working, when did you end working. So if you have multiple experiences with that employer, you have multiple start dates and multiple end dates or continue to work for them dates. So definitely don't sleep on this, especially with only 7 weeks left, because you're reliant on this employer to process the forms as quickly as they can. So you should take this step to generate your form. Now, one thing we've been hearing is that the help tool, for a variety of reasons, you might experience a sort of dead end, right? It might say for some reason it doesn't think it can generate a form for you, or maybe it's unfamiliar with your employer, so it has to confirm your employer first before it can generate a form. Come back in 30 to 60 days. At this point, you don't really have 30 to 60 days, right? The waiver ends in like 7 weeks, so that seems problematic. That's just an example of one reason why the PSLF help tool might be a dead end for you. In that instance, don't panic. You can get the same exact form that you can fill out by hand through studentaid.gov or through Mohila's website. So I have the screen grabs up here from Mohila's website. If you go there, or if you just Google Mohila PSLF and then make sure you go to their actual website, if you click on the employer button in red here, it'll bring you to the page on the right. And you can see on the top right in red, you can download that PDF form. So it's the exact same form. You can just fill it in. It's very simple, but don't let the PSLF help tool be the reason why you don't process or file something on time. It's really pretty straightforward it seems overwhelming, but when you sit down and actually go through the steps, it can be pretty straightforward, and there are resources out there to help you. So definitely take advantage of that and don't get held up at this late hour. Okay. If you're unsure if you're using the right form, on the top right of the form, you can see an expiration date. So the current form is through August of next year. And then also on section 7 of the current form, it's very clear that Mohila is the company you're supposed to send it to, and they just transferred over this summer. So all the new forms say Mohila. So that's just a quick spot check you can do. So once you file the form, Mohila will process it. If they confirm you have the right loan type, they'll move your account over to them, and then they'll go through and process the rest of your application, and then add to your account as many credits as you're eligible for. We recommend people generally do this every year and add in increments of 12, right, for each year, so that if there's an issue along the way, you identify it quickly and you haven't spent 10 years in the wrong plan or something. Right now, we recommend everyone just does it to make sure they benefit from the waiver, but it's just a good idea going forward to do it annually. We don't want anyone finding out too late in the game that there's some other thing they should have been doing and weren't getting credit for this. The timing can be a little confusing because they're going to review your loan type, but what if you're consolidating your loan? At this close hour, don't worry about that. Just get the consolidation application in and get this PSLF form in. There's such a backlog on both. It'll even out as long as you get both in before Halloween. Okay, so common issues real quickly, and then we're going to switch to Q&A for the remainder of the time. Don't submit sloppy forms. They're going to get rejected. If you have to edit something, don't cross it out and write it in. Get a new form. If your employer gives you back a signed form and there's crossed out and edited things, ask them to re-sign a fresh form. This is just how it works. It's frustrating, but your form will get dinged, and you don't want to deal with that with such little time left. Similarly, you might get a letter from Mohila or from your other servicers saying you could qualify, but you have to leave a forbearance. Forbearances don't count for PSLF. The forbearance they're talking about is the payment pause. The payment pause definitely counts for PSLF. The government has been super clear. It feels odd to give you advice to ignore your loan servicer, but in this instance, ignore your loan servicer. It's a problem that they're sending these out. The government knows it. They just haven't had the wherewithal to shut it down yet. So if they say get out of the deferment forbearance, and the deferment or forbearance they're listing is the current payment pause for the next 4 months, just ignore them. Another issue, the help tool, again, some people navigate it and it doesn't let them proceed, or they want to get one option versus the other. You see a couple on the screen right now. Just pick whichever one lets you proceed. It's the same literal form at the end of the day, and you just want to get that form in. Don't worry about whether you're asking for complete forgiveness or partial credit. It's not, that doesn't matter as long as you get the form and get it filed. And finally, when some people consolidate their forms, technically under the regular rules, right, when you consolidate your loans, I should say, when you consolidate, you're restarting the clock. When people are consolidating under the waiver, that's not true, but we've been seeing auto-generated messages that don't reflect the waiver being sent to people who consolidate. So you consolidate your loan like you're supposed to, and then you get this paper that says, congratulations, you have a PSLF eligible loan now. You have 1 credit or you have 0 credits, and that doesn't reflect your decade of work. This is just an auto-generated letter that they haven't paused. They haven't stopped sending. So if you wait a few weeks, you'll get the updated letter that has your actual waiver credits, which will stay on your account. Again, very frustrating that the government hasn't stopped this practice, but this is what's happening with the servicers right now. So just don't panic. As long as you do your part by October 31st, you'll be fine. Okay. So the important takeaways, right? You can suddenly and for a limited period of time get credit for past payment types or loan types that weren't getting credit, but there's a deadline for it. What you need to do is confirm your employer qualifies, confirm your loan types, and consolidate if necessary. Submit your paperwork to certify your employment, and then file a complaint if you have any issues, because if you're having a problem, someone else will. And definitely beware of any scams. You don't need to pay someone thousands of dollars or hundreds of dollars to do this. You shouldn't really be paying anyone. This is free to do. And if you sit down and use resources available to you, I'm confident you can all access it. Final thing, I did want to touch on cancellation. 2 weeks ago, the president announced cancellation. Over 20 million borrowers will have their loans canceled. It's $10,000 per borrower who qualifies, and an additional 10 if that borrower received a Pell Grant. Individuals who have a 2020 or 2021 taxable income of $125,000 or less qualify, or $250 for households. You will have to apply. There currently is no application, so you haven't missed anything, and there's nothing you can currently do other than to go to studentaid.gov and read up on this. If you haven't been getting the payment pause, that means you have a sort of special loan type, and you should consolidate to benefit from this. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but the back of the envelope way to do it is, if I haven't had a payment pause for 2.5 years, I should consolidate. You need to consolidate anyway for PSLF, so that's a good thing. And most importantly, this doesn't replace PSLF. $10,000 or 20 is a lot of money, and for some people that'll cancel their loans, but for others, that's a drop in the bucket. PSLF will wipe out your entire balance. It has no income cutoffs. It has no restrictions on it, right? So you definitely want to proceed with this, get all your credits through the waiver, even if you anticipate getting cancellation. Okay, so that is it. I know we were kind of quick at the end, but I want to reserve our last 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A. So Amy, I'm going to turn things over to you and we can get started.
Thanks, Winston. A lot of borrowers are asking who they can get to sign their PSLF forms.
So that's going to vary. It's a great question. It's very practical. That's going to vary across organizations. So we can connect with folks who organize this, and if there are simple, high-level answers, we can communicate that out to you when you get the recording. But mostly, you should just ask your supervisor and your HR department. Especially for large organizations, it doesn't have to be one person or one office. The Department of Education allows for any employer to designate someone to sign someone or multiple people to sign these forms, as long as that person or those people have access to your employment records so they can verify it, right? So ask your employer. It's going to vary between employers. And if it's a large organization, it doesn't have to be just one. So if your boss or your employer comes back to you and says, it's this one person, we're not going to be able to file or to sign all these forms in the next 7 weeks, you can say to them, it doesn't have to be this one person. Like, let's figure out a way to make this work.
Thanks. And do they accept docu-signatures?
It's a great question. The answer is no. So it has to be what's called a wet signature, which means it has to be that someone literally using either a pen or a digital stylus, but they have to have literally signed it, right? So they can't do a sort of /S type signature. It can't be a cursive font signature, and it can't be DocuSign. If you do that, or if your employer does that, it will get rejected and you might miss the waiver. So definitely make sure it is either a literal ink signature, or if it is digital, that someone actually took like a stylus and wrote it, which I know sounds silly because you can fax these in. So it's not like they're actually holding up the ink signature to the light and confirming it's real, but that's currently what the process and the requirement is.
Thanks, Winston. And what about if borrowers have worked for a nonprofit that is now closed?
So if you work for a nonprofit that is closed, so you can't really get a signature, or for some other reason, you really can't get a signature from a former employer, there is a box you can check on the form above your own signature that says, I really tried, but I can't get my former employer to sign this, so I'm submitting the form anyway. I highly recommend folks only use that as a last resort if you really can't get your former employer for whatever reason to sign, because it makes a little bit more work for you on the back end, because the Department of Education might ask for verification. So if at all possible, get the employer to sign, but if you can't, above your signature on the first page, you can check a box that says, I can't get a signature.
Thank you. We're also getting a lot of questions about the transfer of Mohila to Mohila, and people are wondering if they should reapply after they get switched to Mohila. They're concerned that their account balances aren't showing up on Mohila yet. How can they be proactive in this situation?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Servicing transfers can be very sloppy, and Mohila has been doing not great in the beginning of this process. We're hearing, even as of today, people are getting letters from Mohila that misstate their account balance for PSLF that says that they don't have as many credits as they should. So that is a problem. I want to acknowledge that. Thankfully, California has some really strong state level consumer protections that passed a few years ago. So if you applied during the waiver, so if you know you applied since last October and your account was with FedLoan or someone else and it's going to transfer to Mohila, you shouldn't have to reapply. That should be fine. They're going to transfer it over. Again, it's sloppy, it's scary. I get that. If you're not sure, if you haven't applied, you should apply again. It ultimately doesn't hurt to have reapplied. So if you're feeling like something just isn't right or you're getting miscommunications and you want to reapply, you can do that. But if you have applied to, it would have been FedLoan before Mohila, after the waiver started last October, you should be fine. If you have any evidence of that, if you faxed it and have a fax receipt, if you uploaded it to FedLoan or you're already with Mohila and you uploaded it, keep those receipts for yourselves because it might be useful later. You can't upload it to Mohila unless you're already a Mohila client. Otherwise, you have to mail it or fax it. So if you're going to mail it going forward, if you can get like a certified mail receipt, that would help. But in general, you shouldn't have to reapply just because you were transferred.
Thanks so much. We're also getting a lot of questions about forbearances and deferments. I don't know if you'd mind reviewing that again, and a couple specific questions on like in-school deferments and then also AmeriCorps deferments.
Yeah, so in-school deferments are categorically not going to count. That's just the department policy. In general, under the waiver, deferments and forbearances don't count. So your loan has to have been in a repayment plan, even if you didn't make a payment. There is it is confusing, a separate policy initiative going on. It's a good thing. It's just confusing. It's happening at once that will give you credit for certain forbearances and deferments on your loan towards another cancellation program that will count for PSLF. So these IDR credits that you use to get PSLF cancellation, if you have deferments that are not in-school deferments before 2013, or if you have 12 or more consecutive months of forbearance or 36 or more cumulative months of forbearance on your loan history, those will automatically get credited with credit towards income-driven repayment plans, which count as credit towards PSLF. Now, that process, unfortunately, is not on the same timeline as the waiver. So if you are someone who's like retired and you need the waiver to get PSLF, that process probably won't help you. If you're someone who's just trying to get to cancellation eventually, but you're currently employed, by middle of next year or so, they should have done that, and you will get credit for that. If you have other periods of forbearance or deferment on your history that are like 2 or 3 months here, 2 or 3 months there, you can and you should file a complaint with studentaid.gov through that website and say, basically, I was put into a deferment or forbearance by my servicer when I needed help. I didn't know that wouldn't count for forgiveness. I would like forgiveness for that, right? Because if my servicer had told me I could have done an income-driven repayment for a lower period, a lower payment, I would have done that. So it's a little complicated, but again, the cascading answer is they generally under the waiver don't count, but under this other process, you can get credit for forbearance and deferment of certain types, but it won't be until next year. And it's mostly automatic unless you have short-term forbearances that you have to file a complaint for.
Thanks. A lot of borrowers are wondering about contracted work. If you work for a temp agency or you're not a W-2 employee, does that qualify?
So contract work does not qualify in the sense that if you are working for a contractor or a temp agency and you go to work for the government is not actually your employer in that relationship, so it doesn't count. If you work for like a nonprofit contractor or temp agency, then they're your actual employer and they're qualifying. So for most people in this situation, they're not going to be considered a qualifying employee because their technical employer is like a firm, like a for-profit firm that is temping or contracting them out to the government. So that is unfortunately how that works. Also, currently, the government requires W-2 employment, not a 1099 contractor. Again, that might change in the future. And if it changes in the future, it will likely be retroactive, but that's not going to be in play for the waiver.
Thank you. And how can military borrowers get their employment certified?
That's a great question. I would point you to whoever you currently engage with for your veteran benefits, or if you're active service, any sort of administrative office you work with. This might be something too where in follow-up, there's probably a more specific answer we can try to convey, but your DoD records. I should say for military borrowers, the DoD is supposed to start a data sharing program with the Department of Education, so that going forward, this will be automatic. But again, that won't be in place in time for the waiver. But any point of contact you have for administration or benefits as a military active performer, you should check with them.
Thanks, Winston. I think they're also accepting DD-214s as proof of employment during that time. So you could also submit that with your application. And what about if borrowers have graduated during the payment pause? Is there anything that they should consider if they're currently working for a nonprofit, given that the payment pause has been in effect the entire time they've been working?
Yeah, well, definitely for that population, I'd say you don't have to have accrued so many years of work before applying, right? You should, we talk about applying, but really what you're doing is you're certifying periods of time until you get to 120. So it's not like a program that you're opting in or out of. It's about when are you certifying the work that you've done. And so someone who's just graduated, even if they only have 6 months, 2 months, 12 months of work under their belt, should certify by the waiver to get those credits, make sure they're all good to go, and then they can keep going in their job just like anyone else. I'd also say if you graduated during the payment pause, to really early on look into your payment plan options, because this might be a new experience for you having to pay on your federal student loans. And so you should familiarize yourself with which of the IDR plans will be best for you.
Thanks, Winston. And do Parent Plus loans qualify?
So Parent Plus loans generally qualify for public service loan forgiveness, although to access the income-driven plan, prepayment plans that you need, you have to consolidate them, which is a frustrating quirk of the law. Parent Plus loans, however, do not qualify for the waiver. That is just a policy decision that the government made, which frankly, I can't explain. I don't really know why they did it, but they did. So currently Parent Plus loans, and if you're not familiar with those, Parent Plus loans are loans, federal loans that you take out, not for your own education, but for your child or grandchild, your dependent child or grandchild's education. Those do not qualify. However, if you are someone who is a Parent Plus loan borrower, but you also have your own loans, you took it out for your own education, you can do that consolidation process to combine them together, and that new combined loan will benefit from the waiver because you have a non-Parent Plus loan in the mix.
Thanks, Winston. Are any payments made before 2007 qualifying payments?
No, this is just because the law didn't exist before October 2007. So you could have had 30 years in public service in a totally pristine payment record prior to October 2007. For PSLF purposes, that just won't count. We're only looking to employment and payment and loan type from October 2007 looking forward. And I think we probably have time for maybe one more quick question, and then we want to hand things back over to Nicole.
Okay, one final question is, where can people find the application for the PSLF program and the waiver?
So everything's going to be at studentaid.gov. I highly encourage you to go and poke around there. Under the managing loan tabs, you can find the PSLF dropdown, but also on that main page, you can find more information about cancellation and how to sign up to get live and updates about how to access that. But studentaid.gov is your one-stop shop. You can also go to Amy and my organization's website, forgivemystudentdebt.org. And we have all of the content we just talked about in Q&A and tutorial videos and everything there if you want to replay any of what we've discussed today. Great. Well, thank you, Amy, for moderating all this Q&A, and thank you again for having us here. And Nicole, we're going to hand it over to you to wrap things up.
Thank you so much to both of you. So as we wrap up, I want to thank everyone again for joining us and for the very active Q&A. Thanks so much to Winston and to Amy from the Student Borrower Protection Center for your expertise and your guidance and fielding the hundreds of questions that we have here. We also want to thank the Department of Human Resources for their partnership with our office at the Treasurer Tax Collector to produce this program and to make sure that we could drive so much traffic for us here today. We know that there's a lot of questions that we didn't get to, and so just a reminder that we'll share a recording of this webinar with everyone who registered today. It'll also be up on our website in case you want to forward it along to anyone who wasn't registered. And I encourage you, please don't hesitate to reach out to our organizations as resources. And we hope that many of you will be able to take advantage of the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Waiver Program before it expires in just 7 weeks. So with that, we'll say have a great afternoon. Thank you again for joining us.